Our next speaker is Mr. Arastoo Mihandoust, a musician, composer, and researcher of Persian music specializing in the Timurid-Safavid repertoire, and a researcher in ethnomusicology at the University of Tehran. Today, he'll present his paper titled Introducing a Newly Found Safavid Treatise on the Eight Dastgahs. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Mihandoust.
Thank you very much. I actually hoped to be there, but unfortunately the circumstances won't allow for that. But anyway, so what I'm going to talk about today, and I hope if there's any problem with my voice or the video, please let me know. It's a chance discovery, like many other discoveries. And this was a treatise that was found about 2 years ago when I was working with the Turkish portal of musical manuscript, and I will get into it sooner. So first things first, what is a dastgah? What do I mean by the term dastgah? It means the same thing that I mean the same thing that we know today from the traditions of Iran and Azerbaijan. It's a multimodal complex that is essentially the core feature of the musical tradition here. And so far, its historical roots have been traced back to early Qajar or slightly earlier period, based on texts that we have available for us. I think William Sumitz and Eckhard Neubauer and Mohsen Mohammadi have good contributions in this regard. But in the earlier Safavid texts, which have been, I think, published by Dr. Purjabadi, the term dastgah appears only very rarely, and there with very uncertain meaning. And it appears that it's something to do with a potential feature of the modes. Some modes have dastgah, some others don't. And I'll get into that in a minute. But the multimodal complexes aren't a totally new thing, because we already knew that in the Safavid period there were multimodal complexes, but they were titled shad, which is especially strange because the term shad, even in this Safavid period, meant tuning. Why would the term tuning mean multimodal complex? So enter manuscript number 2655 of the Ulu Cami library in Turkey. And it's a codex that contains many works, 7 works, or actually 8. And these are miscellaneous works, some on aruz, some on Ghafiyeh, some munsha'at. But the 2 manuscripts that are particularly interesting are the ones that are related to music. One is a second copy of the treatise by Qasim ibn Dost Ali Bukhari, and he is the author in India, I think during the reign of Akbar. And this treatise is titled Hadiqat al-Naghamat. The other treatise is not. The other manuscript of this work is not titled this way. And the second musical work, Nuskhe Digar dar ilm musiqi, is catalogued in the manuscript catalogs as a work consisting of 9 folios. But actually, this is not true, as I will show you. The work actually consists of 2 different works. One of them is a very pretty typical standard Safavid musical treatise, naming modes and shobe and awaze and relating musical things to zodiac signs and animals, and when a mode should be played and for what ethnic group. And then it ends on the folio 134 with the formulaic phrase tammat al-risala. So, but as you can see here, the text continues after the end of this section with the names of 17 Bahr Usul, these rhythmic cycles. So this is the second work that begins with the rhythmic cycles, and it gives us a short note indicating that different ustads have different lists of these usul names. And then it continues with a very interesting qasida, which pairs 6 awaze modes to 12 parda modes, and its title is very strange. ذکر 6 آوازه که در وقت ترکیب خوانی هر یکی از کجا ظاهر شود. The term ترکیب خوانی lets us know that in the Safavid period this modal mixture may have been known as the ترکیب خوانی. And then the treatise becomes something else. It contains the texts for a few tasnifs. Only the first one has a title, and it is by an otherwise unknown Haj Mehdi Tabrizi, which is an important clue as to where this work was probably written. It is in Usul Ufar. It also has the note هر مصرعی که خوانده شود اسم هر نغمه برده شود همان ظاهر شود, which is the type of kulliyat or kar-e-natiq, as we know from Ottoman sources or earlier Timurid sources, but unfortunately we don't know who this Haj Mehdi Tabrizi is. I couldn't figure out. And there are, as I said, three more tasnifs probably, and they are untitled. That's why I say probably. But one of them is by Baghiyai Naini, two of them, the poetry. And the last one is by an earlier Timurid composer, Amir Shahi Sabzavari. And next are three diagrams in this treatise. These are also stereotypically Safavid. They list 12 maqams, 6 awaze, 24 shobe, and each of the three diagrams have different lists of 48 gushe. And in two of these diagrams, there are also 16 and 25 or more rhythmic cycles. I don't know if it's 25 because the manuscript is partly damaged. And here's the most important part of the treatise that sets it apart from all other sources that we have from the Safavid period, and it's the Dastgahhat Samaniye dar saz nazd ahl amal in ast. So it's clearly breaking away from the tradition by citing ahl amal. Now this is the late Safavid period, as we will see. There are 8 dastgahs, and the little numbers you see on each of the dastgah names are the number of components that belongs to each of them, and the sum total of all these numbers is 42, which is the classification that we know from Timurid sources. The 42 standard modes of the Timurid categorization: 6 awaze, 12 maqam, and 24 shobe. There are no gushes in this dastgah list. And here's the formatting of this dastgah list. As you can see, this is a name of the dastgah, and then the main components of this dastgah, Hosseini, and then there's a short note following each of these modes, many of them. It says Hosseini Parde. It's clarifying that Hosseini is a Parde or Maqam. That is the main 12, one of the main 12 modes. And then Kuchak Parde. But Muhayyar, since we know it's a Shoba, it doesn't have a clarification. And then under the mode names, we have another short note. For instance, in this case, روی عراق نیز می باشد. Hosseini is on Iraq. It's a technical term. Or for Kuchak, وَيَقَالُ لَهُ زِيرَفْكَنْ. And it's bilingual here. It's strange. The two names for this mode, Zirafkan or Kuchak, we know from other canonical sources. And then a short line of poetry, or a hemistish. می گذشتم از رهی چشمم به مژگانی فتاد. Or as you can see here, a Turkish, actually an Azerbaijani Turkish verse. نی کمی هرگه که بزمی وصلینی یاد ایلرم. It's not ney gibi, it's ney kimi. So it's Azerbaijani Turkish. We can know that. So this is the formatting of the treatise. And it's thus a significant work. And the most significant part of it is the dating. It has a clear date. It's authored in 1131 Hijri, which is just a few years before the fall of Safavid capital to the Afghans. So this is definitely a Safavid work. We have a Safavid system of dastgah. And the latest element in the work that I could identify is a line of poetry by a page of Shah Sulayman, Mirza Hasan Khan, گره قطره به دریا شده صد باز شود. And since Shah Sulayman started his reign in 1666, we can have a rough estimate of the work being written between 1666 and 1716. Whoever authored this work, we don't know, but he was a contemporary of Amir Khan Gorji. So we don't know the work where it is written, but there are composers whose works have been with the name are mentioned in this treatise with the name of the composer. The oldest one is, of course, Khaja, composer of Sahatnameh, and then Timurid figure, Jami, Ghulam Shadi, Mullah Kokabi, which is the early Safavid figure from Central Asia, probably. And then after all these Central Asian figures or Timurid Khorasani figures, we have the names of Safavid composers that we know from Western Iran. Shams, which is likely Ustad Shams Tishi, which was from Shiraz, active during the days of Shah Ḥabbas, or Haj Mehdi Tabrizi that I just mentioned. We don't know him, but since his work appears only in the early 17th century manuscripts, I guess he lived sometimes before that. And then the Baghiya that was mentioned by the previous authors, and Mazaghi Naini, Aqa Muʻmin Musannif, who was active in Isfahan, and Mirza Asad Beg, son of Hakim Kuchak. We know the Hakim Kuchak was from Qom, so maybe the treatise is written in Qom or Isfahan or Tabriz. I would bet on Isfahan as the likely center. The work also has among its tasnifs works that we know from not only Iranian sources, Safavid sources, but also from Ottoman sources, contemporary Ottoman sources. For instance, Hafiz Post, which is authoring his song text collection at the same time as our treatise, roughly, has these songs, famous compositions, Gisuye Mu'ambar or Sahat Name, in other song text collection from Istanbul, or Kare Golestan, or Qole Dasht Arjan. And Dr. Wright has treated some of these items in his book, Amal Hezar Shokr and Bito Nafasi. And this is a work, the last one you can see here on the manuscript. It's in Dastgah Rast, under Panchgah, Bito Nafasi Khosh Nazadam Khosh Nanishastam. And we know this work also from Hafiz Post's anthology. And it's actually a version of this work survives until today, though there's no guarantee that the melody is old. And there's also another aspect that's not very much researched, and that is the connection between the early Safavid repertoire and the repertoire that survives in Central Asia. This is one clue. So in Dastgah Neyshabur, which also includes the mode Nava in our treatise, there's a song, Kuja dar mahsharat parvay man hast. And this work also appears under the mode Nava in later Shash Maqam Bayaz from Central Asia. And so finally, here are the 8 dastgahs themselves and their components in the treatise. As you can see, the most components belong to Dastgah Rast and the least to Dastgah Segah. But then there's also strange relationships that appear to be correlate to the earlier Maqam Shobe scheme that we see in Timurid sources. But here it appears to have been dissolved. For example, Maqam Ruhawi in Timurid sources, in most early Safavid sources, has 2 shobes, Nowruz Ajam and Nowruz Arab. But here you see only 2 of them belong to one Dastgah, Dastgah Ajam. Or for instance, Dastgah Rast here includes the shobes Panchgah and Mubargha, which are the 2 shobes of Maqam Rast in the earlier classification. But also there's relationship with the earlier 4 shad that I mentioned in the beginning. For instance, as you can see here, the early shad dogah in the early Safavid period consists of modes that we see here in the Dastgah Dogah and Dastgah Hosseini. So it seems that there is a type of strange relationship between a pair of Dastgahs with one of the early 4 shads. It seems like the 4 shads became the 8 Dastgah. And I won't get into too much of these details, but you can see there are correlations in other 3 cases as well. Like for instance, in Shad Rast, we have modes like Rast, Panchgah, Salmak. All of these modes are here. We can see them in Dastgah Rast as well, but also Nava, which is part of the Dastgah Neyshabur in later Safavid time. So there is a correlation with the Shad system. And finally, with the help of this treatise, we can once again revisit the definition of Dastgah in the early stage. We have some vague definitions of with this mode has Dastgah and the other mode does not have Dastgah. And another source gives us a very interesting but cryptic definition of dastgah. So it says 6 of the maqams, because they are neem perde, you cannot compose a sawt in them or naqsh because it does not have a dastgah. So they compose music in showbaz of these modes so that these modes appear as well. It's a cryptic passage, but it helps us understand what dastgah is. We can figure out which modes have neem perde based on Taqsim al-Naghamat, the Safavid Treatise, and also the early Ottoman treatise by Kershehli, Yusuf Nizamuddin, who defines the modes in a similar manner with neem perde or without neem perde. And you can see here in the early song text collections that we have from Ottoman sources, there is a correlation between the intervallic structure and the prevalency of the repertoire. For instance, Husseini and Ras and Iraq does not have a neem perde in these treatises, and at the same time they have a higher share of the repertoire. It's more than 40 pieces in these sources. But at the same time, the other modes that do have neem perde in their definition, according to these two sources, they have a lesser share of repertoire. And also, on the other hand, the modes that the 8 dastgah modes in these early, in one of the early Ottoman song text collections, once again, when we check the definition of the modes themselves, many of them do not have these neem perde in their structures, and the number of songs in them is usually high, except for Neyshabur. But there's also a contradiction because Ajam has a neem perde according to these sources, and its number of works is low, but Ozdal also has a neem perde, yet its song number is high. So it's not a clear definition. At any rate, a fully formed modal system based on dastgah is clearly a Safavid product. We can be certain of that now. And the Safavids conceptualized this new modal system with reference to this old repertoire. As you saw, these compositions were by Jami and Khaja Abdul Qadir and Ghulam Shadi, some of them. And there's, as I tried to argue, there's a relationship between the early 4 shad and the 8 dastgahs that appear later. But also, it seems that the dastgah system has managed to gather those early 42 modes in a new way and organize them in a new way that is not seen in the Timurid sources or late Timurid 24 Shobet 12 maqam system. And so my final point is, although we do not have the structure of the modes in the late Safavid period, so we cannot reconstruct the 8 dastgahs with certainty, but the shared repertoires with the Ottoman source and the later Shesh Maqam sources from Central Asia may be able to give us some hints into understanding what modes were in what structures, because maybe if a song is in Rast mode here in Iran, but in also in Rast mode in Istanbul, it may mean something about the structure of Rast into chords. While, for instance, I have seen compositions that are in one maqam, in one locale, in one court in Iran, and in another maqam in Istanbul. So that might also be of value. So thank you. That was my presentation.